Hi, my name's Philip Bither, Curator for Performing Arts at the Walker Arts Center, and with me is Karen Sherman. We just premiered her new work, Soft Goods, here in the McGuire Theater, and we're here to talk about it a little bit. So Karen, how are you doing after opening night and a 2-year process, really, of
2 or 3
conception and development?
I feel good. I'm tired, but I'm feeling good.
Last night brought me back to, or right now, this space right here. One of the first residencies you had with us was really a gathering of technicians as well as dance artists from the community in more of a mode of research and conversation, right? Could you talk about why you did that and what you found from that?
Well, I had a lot of things that I was interested in. I mean, the things that made me want to make this project in the first place, and pages of, ideas and themes and images. And as we started working with the core group in trying to figure out how to, embody those images or how to find new ideas from the existing list of ideas, and kind of work really collaboratively in that way, where everybody, could kind of riff on the poetics of the ideas. I wanted to open it up to a broader group of people, so I asked a bunch of technicians and designers and dance makers from Minneapolis to just come in one day and kind of we called it a roundtable. I don't know if it's really round. It was really a round table.
I can't remember if you had selected your cast already at that point.
Yeah, pretty much. Or so the bulk of it. But we also just had. It was still very research phase. So there were some other people who were working on the project who. It was very early on. We hadn't fully cast it, but people to help explore some of the ideas. And then we had a day where we brought people in for a conversation. For me, that was really about finding out how a larger pool of people felt about the things we already knew we wanted to look at, and then to see what we weren't, what we were missing, or what were the issues that were also of interest to people, that were things we hadn't thought about. So, and just to kind of generate a community conversation.
And were people surprised, delighted, concerned about the inside-out nature of the work? You're really turning the hidden into the performance itself, the work that technicians do behind the scenes. And how did the tech world and other production managers, designers, stagehands feel about a work that would bring them into the light of the stage and center stage?
Well, most production people I know, maybe that's too broad of a stroke, but many production people I know want to do their version of this show. Everybody is, and a lot of people have said that to me as I've been making it, I've always wanted to make that show. Or if you want genie choreography, I got some genie choreography for you.
So it wasn't like this brand new thing that people are like, oh, I never thought of that before, but.
No, well, I think there's also a thing of, as artists have with other artists, technicians also have with artists of, I could do that show better.
Yes.
So.
Part of the tension, right?
The tension, and also just the actually artistic conversation, really. And that artistic conversation, whether it's happening between artists or between technicians, or technicians and artists, I mean, I hate to even separate the two categories. Sometimes the tone of those conversations are, competitive or jaded or dismissive, but in reality, they are at core still, in the more abstract sense, an artistic conversation. I mean, it's a response to ideas that someone else is putting forward, and having your own ideas in response to what you're being given. So, but also, on the production end of things, you get to see so much beauty, visual beauty, and sort of atmospheric and energetic beauty just in the process of tech that audiences never see. And I think that there's a real recognition of that. And in fact, last night after the show, a local lighting designer said that very thing to me. That there's so many beautiful things that happen, and it was so good to see them really like presented and honored, formally, in a way, within this performance of the raw process.
Right. That balance between rawness and reality, the fictive nature juxtaposed against the real names you all use, the real roles you play. Was that early on? Did you know that was the tone you were going to take, and that sort of blurry line between, are they really playing themselves, or you're at times very much constructing a situation on stage, which is more play-like and fictional, and other times it felt like we could have been watching a total exchange in real life between a dancer and a technician or something like that.
Yeah. I think in the beginning I always knew that I wanted it to be naturalistic and surreal.
Right.
And I think I had an idea about how that would play out, but and some of that actually played out as I intended or as I suspected, and some of it just evolved on its own.
Right.
And I think some of it came about from as most I think creative processes do, where you put a lot of stuff out there and then you pull stuff away.
Right.
And the more we kind of like stripped things away and distilled, I think the way that the kind of toggling between the real and the unreal, the surreal, the naturalistic, the
human,
the sort of fiction, nonfiction.
Right.
The way that kind of rolled out or got deployed was actually even more sort of murkier than I thought. Like sometimes the lines weren't as cleanly drawn, or starkly drawn, and I really felt that last night watching. Finally with an audience and like sitting with them and being taken on this pathway with them, and I was really. I mean, that was a really like very pleasant surprise to see. Oh, this. There's a section in the piece that's this lighting wave, like this rolling wave of light that just roils around the room, and I keep thinking that the way that light moves around is the visual version of what I'm describing in terms of how the fiction, nonfiction kind of fades in and out of itself.
Right. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. The arc of the piece, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about it. When you come in the house, I loved that most of the audience just thought we really didn't have it together.
Someone sat down behind me and said, "Oh, they're not done setting up yet."
But I was also surprised how many people were just like, they didn't really know that this was part of the show, but they also didn't really seem to mind that all this stuff was still being done, put together. And but you take us on this journey, and though there's scenes that are very funny, and there's things that happen that punctuate throughout, and it gets deeper and somewhat darker as the work then goes on. Was that, do you want to talk about the construction of the composition of the work as a whole evening, the way you shaped the emotional arc of the piece?
Well, some of it, I feel like, dance making, there's so much, I mean, the dance really happens with rearranging sequence. I mean, it's really about, if only it were that easy, actually.
Yeah, right.
But sequence is so important, and we certainly did do some rearranging of things, but in many ways the order of how the piece progresses happened pretty intact. And
you had a sort of planned structure, almost storyboarded it early on.
No, I mean, I actually wanted to storyboard it, but I could never quite get there. I think we just we made things, and sometimes the order in which they happened just seemed so right that we didn't really tinker with it too much. I mean, I certainly have things that I still would like to maybe change or fix, or that you always feel that way. But I actually really, the whole, once the top of the show starts, I mean, it's really 20 minutes or longer that nothing really happens.
Right.
I mean, that it's very, there aren't any like huge broad strokes.
Right.
And
that's the multiple entrances of
yeah,
the dancers and
yeah,
people starting to kind of
yeah,
have a relationship.
yeah, and things. Yeah, I think there's. I mean, somebody last night said to me, "Oh, the piece really became." It's someone who had seen some, rehearsals along the way.
Right.
Said, "Oh, it's really a show about time now."
Right.
And we had talked a lot about time in the process and about how, in the production world, you're sort of on this endless loop of like, what's the show this week? What's the show this week? There's
Right.
so much repetition.
Yeah, right.
The company keeps arriving every week, and they're just new people, but it's the same moment of arrival for you as the house
right.
technician.
Yeah.
And that your time really is sort of endless. So that ended up existing in the piece in that way,
Right.
from an audience point of view, I thought
was
kind of cool. That
the way the cycles would come, and it also for me is often in our shows here we'll have a 3-day load-in setup and
right.
then the run of the show, and it felt very much like it repeated that cycle. They came in 3 times.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Each
yeah.
time there's, in this instance, there continued to be a certain amount of tension and animosity between everyone, or a certain kind of standoff.
Yeah.
You captured that beautifully in the relationship, a sort of passive aggressiveness at times.
I sort of think of it as two packs of dogs meeting,
right.
and the wariness and the curiosity.
Right.
Yeah. And it occurred to me, it's dogs are territorial, and this is the theater is territory that belongs to both packs,
right.
dancers and crew.
Yeah.
So
right.
both really feel ownership and belonging in the space, but not necessarily as a unified whole, at least in the
Right.
beginning of a
yeah.
week.
And it seems I've found as being one of those, and you're in a unique role as both working on a lot of the crews for shows here, but also actively for a couple decades making your own work and being a creative, a dance artist and a performance artist. You see that tension, and it's beautifully reflected in the work. But it sometimes feels like it falls down in that technicians might feel like these people don't have a clue about how things actually have to function and how to realize, like, into the logistics and even even the expense and all the other, and the artistic, the generative artists are thinking, why can't they just don't get the aesthetic, and why can't they be more artistically and I think that's just, both have their roles to play, but it's just a line of empathy that sometimes it isn't totally there or something.
Well, and I think the in addition to that, there's this other, much more subtle or less maybe acknowledged or articulated thing going on, where really everybody's trying to work towards this. Everybody has the same common goal.
Right.
I mean, it's not often that a technician wants the show to look bad or be
right.
bad.
Yeah, right.
Because it always feels good to everybody when it is great and looks
right.
great. And so even the thing of the animosity or the charged tension, that's why I say there's also this like curiosity, or the dog. Why the dog thing seems so relevant to me, because you really see that when two dogs meet, that they also kind of want to connect.
Sure.
There's so
right.
I feel that you do want to. It's a very, especially for the artist, it's a very vulnerable week, and
yes.
so, and I always say that to like the crew here and other crews that I work on, like when we meet the artists, they're having the worst week of their life quite often.
Right.
So nobody's best self comes forward at the time, but
right.
Yeah. So, but I think
because
often
they're on the road, they're under pressure. They only have a few days to get their show
and
together.
you're showing something really personal, and that is also, I think, especially in live performance, it could go horribly wrong because it's real time. So, but I think also technicians are also trying to work towards this great successful thing, but it's just, I think often the cultures and then the actual the work that has to get done and how it gets executed, they're coming from such totally different starting points. The trajectories are really different, and they're not always compatible in
life starting place, and also like class and culture differences.
Well, yeah, I mean they're two
gender,
totally the culture, the humor, the kind of an attitude of either sort of like cavalierness or brusqueness, or from the crew point of view, and sometimes artists seem standoffish and snobby, and which is often really more shyness and vulnerability and fear, and I think also technicians are often very intimidating to artists, and even within the group of artists, there are different relationships that everybody has to have with the crew, so that dancers, for example, don't have to have the same relationship with the crew that the choreographer has to have with the crew. So even the dynamics between the individuals within each group, I mean, it gets very deep.
And then there's a dynamic that between the choreographer and dancers that is also a power and sometimes richly tense. I love that section.
Richly tense. That's
you said when you, as choreographer, asked over the voice of God, Mike, asked Max, the company manager, to tell the dancers what, and they all could hear you, but you had to the sort of channeling through someone else, and that it's like kind of power move there or something.
Power and obliviousness. And channels of communication, sort of trying to work within hierarchies that don't make sense, or
there's a lot of humor in the work, but the source originally was one of loss, and even the death of several key colleagues in our community, and I wondered, and then really Carrie Wood's passing, who was a key collaborator of yours, right in the midst of the development process. Two questions. One is, how did you forge ahead? What did you have to call up in yourself? Were you thinking maybe to just not move ahead with the project? And then how did you've always made work that had really sophisticated and sense of humor and wit, but was it hard to insert, to deal with some of these aspects comically when there's so much tragedy that surrounds the making of the work?
Well, I think most of my work is actually pretty tragic.
Yes, no.
Well, not tragic, but I'm really interested in the more difficult, lonelier things. But I also, I think I have a pretty good sense of humor, and I also, I don't feel like it's like there's
those things
never
can
not
live
a place
together.
for that.
Right.
But and actually, that's so often where the real, pathos, real sadness comes from. But I mean, I think when I started it, it was definitely, I decided to start making it after two technician colleagues died very close together in about the same week, and one from drinking and one from suicide, and that's kind of where the seed of the project started. But it wasn't really going to be about them, and it wasn't really going to, but it was about the life.
Right.
And I had one point, sort of midway through the process, before I'd really gotten to rehearse it at all. I was at a conference at a party, and I had been talking about the project, and so throughout this conference, people kept coming up to me and telling me one horror story after another.
Was this at NPN?
It was at NPN,
last year? Yeah.
2 years ago.
2 years ago. The National Performance Network, of this big national gathering. Yeah.
Yes, and one of the funders happened to be there, and she turned to me and she said, "You're going to have to figure out how you're going to deal with like hearing this stuff for 2 years, like how you're going to live with this difficult material." And at the time, I thought, "No, I got this." Like I was like, "Well, I've been living with this difficult material for a long time, and as I mentioned in that interview with Kate Sutton Johnson, I had a technician colleague who committed suicide over 20, 25 years ago, and the response to her death among other technicians really threw me, because it was very, they really sort of deified her suicide. And so, at this conference, when this funder said that to me, I thought, I'm already prepared for this material, which is why I can even make a piece about it. I mean, it didn't feel like, arrogant. It just felt like, no, this isn't news to me, this stuff. But I think because I was talking about it, a lot of people were saying, "Oh yeah, no, I know a story too."
Right.
So, but then when Carrie died, which was just in this past March, it's December now, that was just, obviously it was just, it could not have been closer in any way to me personally, to the project, to the ideas within the project. It was like a landmine. And I didn't so much feel that the material, it was clear that it only underscored the relevancy of the material.
Right.
But I felt lost in the wilderness in terms of how to speak about the material. I thought I kind of knew how I wanted to speak about the material, although the process even up until that point was still very difficult, and I was like, this is such a hard show. That was even before the show got hard on a technical level.
Right, sure.
But
on an emotional level, just hard to be dealing with a lot of tragic material and things.
Well, I felt like artistically at times I didn't even know how to make the piece, even before Carrie died. I was just like, this is a puzzle. This show is hard. Like, how do I get all these performers to embody these ideas? What are the ideas? How do we do it?
Right.
What is the dance? Is there a dance? It was really just like, this is really, really hard. And then when she died, it kind of blew the whole thing up so, like, totally, that I was like, wow, I could really do anything at this point. Which was on one hand both a sort of liberating feeling, but also very the opposite of whatever, like confining.
Yes, right.
And I really entertained many, many, many other versions of this piece than the one that we made, including, I don't think I really considered not doing it at all, but I did consider doing it and just having an audience and us just saying, well, we were literally just sitting here saying we were trying to make this piece, and then this thing happened, and so we don't have a show for you. And instead we like to talk to you about
these issues.
about the hazards.
Right.
And at that point in time, I actually felt that was potentially a legitimate show, which I think probably still could be a legitimate show.
We might have had to have a conversation.
I know. I actually, believe me, at the time I thought, like, how am I going to tell Philip about this idea? How am I going to pitch this new version?
Yeah, right.
Maybe it should be free.
We might do that version tonight after the show.
Right.
Q&A, but no.
But then we actually, because that Carrie died the night before we were starting another residency here.
Right.
So we were thrown into this situation where it's interesting. I hadn't really made the parallel, but I should back up to say that several years ago, when those two colleagues died within the same week, when we found out about it, I happened to be working here, and these were two guys who worked here.
You found out about both at the same time?
I found out, yeah. I mean, it was like the same
Yeah.
week, so basically the news kind of all came at once. And I was on a load-in call here, and we were, you know, doing a lighting hang and kind of trying to have a conversation about what had happened, but there really wasn't like a time, we couldn't just sit and sort of like process it at all.
Right.
And when Carrie died, it was kind of similar in that she died, you know, she was supposed to...
The day she was supposed to arrive.
Yeah, she was supposed to be here, and she died later that night. And then we had to come in and start our residency.
Yeah, and you have said to me and publicly how hard this work was because you had to use every hour to assemble.
Yes,
when you had all 10 people and your design team and everything else, it had to, you had to use it so efficiently because you were working with the whole theater.
Yeah, we didn't have like a regular rehearsal process that was just ongoing, and then we would have the designers come in. You know, this was really, we only worked all together all at once, you know, for like a week at a time, and then we wouldn't work for months at all.
As I remember, you did take at least that day or two to just talk, right?
We took like the first hour.
Okay.
And actually one of the performers in the show, Zach, was just joining the project. That was his very first day with us. He didn't even know like any of these people.
Right.
And I had found out that Carrie died at like 7:30 that morning, and our rehearsal started at 9. And so the first thing we had to do was tell everybody.
Right.
And so poor Zach was just like,
I
don't know what's going on.
Right.
And then so we you know, talked about it for an hour or two, and then we just were like, well, let's start trying to make stuff. So actually the first thing we did was, let's try to see if we can recreate some of her lighting, the stuff that we had made in previous residencies.
To try to hold on to it in a certain way.
Yeah, and let's talk to her, you know, like this is a seance. I'd always thought of this piece as being a seance in some way.
Yeah.
And it really was that week. So it was like, so we talked about the people who'd been on previous residencies, we talked about what we had remembered that she had made. And
did you have videotape of past residencies?
We did, and in fact there's a section that's in the show still. It's that roiling light wave.
Yeah. Toward the end of the show, you mean?
No, it's after Ross.
Oh, yeah.
Stands by himself.
Right.
And Carrie made that. And I had it on video, and I think, you know, 3 designers since have tried to recreate exactly what she did, and Rick has come pretty close, but no one's really been able to figure out how she cued it.
Yeah.
And the very little like paperwork or files that I have from her, or that I was able to get from her husband, don't really show how she did that. So. So that's also been this incredible kind of conversation, you know, like across the veil of people trying to recreate her.
Right.
So yeah, we did a lot of that, and all of there are Kleenex boxes that keep reappearing in the show, and that's from that residency because we were sitting here telling everybody, and we had to get Christian, who's the crew chief here, to go get us a bunch of Kleenex because we were all crying.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and there's a couple sections that we made that week, specifically that were in response to Carrie dying, that are in the show now.
Yeah. There's a scene in the show, not that this is so directly related, but where there's a tragic like an electrical accident.
Oh yeah.
In which you're not sure what the end result of the technicians. There's a cathartic kind of sense of responsibility and guilt with the self-slapping afterward and things. Do you can you talk about that moment in the piece a little bit?
I like that you saw it that way.
Oh, tell me how you saw it. or how you made it. I saw it as something went very wrong.
Yeah.
And people were getting hurt.
Yeah.
And there was I didn't know if it was electrical or
yeah.
something else. And then the stage manager, the production manager, felt fully responsible and left the theater afterward as well.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Is that a misread?
No, I mean, there are multiple reads,
Yeah,
so
sure.
There's a power surge, we call it,
yeah.
which yes could be. Who knows where that goes? What I mean, it is one of those things. Like the power surge was always this thing we had. It was actually something that I think we made with Kerry. I know the first part of it was, and then we, that section wasn't made linearly, so we made the surge was always there, and then it was like, how do we had something else afterwards, and it was like, that's not really working, and let's do this, and so, the first part, I mean, that moment happens, the time that elapses between the surge and the moment and the next thing with the production manager is, 7 seconds maybe, but of course it was made over the course of a year and a half.
Right.
So
I definitely mentally saw them as connected, as a response.
Well, sure.
Right.
I also see it as, the people you see sort of having this direct response to the surge.
Right.
Are the men, the three. So the crew is made up of 3 men and 1 woman. And they are the ones who you see in that moment, and she's the one immediately following that moment who, I don't know, suffers a different consequence, or, and I do think that's actually a really great read on it, and she is the one who's clearly in charge.
Right. But
a woman in power, you can't keep them there for too long, so you got to get rid of them.
Right. And maybe you're thinking she was more internalizing the emotional response rather than a physical.
Yeah. Well, and she's there with the dancers.
Right. Right.
Those are the only people who are on stage with her, or the only other women in the piece.
Yeah.
Besides me, but I count in another world.
Yeah.
So that. Yes, she internalizes an external experience,
right,
and which I think is relevant to the dance world, and that women are are such a huge population of the dance world, and how women are socialized to process the world around them is to internalize things and turn things back on themselves.
Yes, right.
In a particular way, I think men have to do that too. It's a very different process and different outcome. But yeah.
Did you? You've worked with us for a lot of years as a technician and as a helping other artists realize their work. You know this theater really well. Do you think you could have done this piece just walking into any other theater?
We'll find out.
Were there a lot of things you knew you've always like I'm surprised nobody's done this, or there's technology.
No, I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
I don't really. The thing about I'm going to do this thing that no one's done.
Yeah,
or,
on a tech level, you mean, or
on,
whatever.
And on an artist level. On an artist level. I think, as an artist and as an audience member and as a technician, I can't even tell you how many times I've seen an artist come into a space that I knew.
Yeah.
Do something they thought they were the first person to do. So I long ago was like, well, it's not possible to do something that hasn't been done. So I don't even entertain that.
Oh, that's really wise, because I've seen I even had an artist here yesterday who was making a visual artist who's making a new performance piece. The whole the whole discussion leading up to it was she's wants to use smoke and lighting as primary living, and she, after the show she's like, what do I do now? But no, so it
do
was,
it your way.
Yeah, exactly right. But
yeah.
but so this idea of like the seeking out the new, the thing that's never been done. You've been in part of enough shows that you sort of that's not a big priority.
No.
Yeah. Right.
I'm not. Yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to do things my way.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, I'm trying. Obviously, like if I see something that someone else is. I mean, that happens all the time where you're like, oh, I've got this idea, and then you see someone else do it before you've done your show, and they're just like, right. I know that I had that idea before they did. Yeah. But now what am I going to do?
It's also sort of funny. I mean, this theater, you've known of the debates we had internally about what kind of theater to really build.
Right.
And in many ways, for a contemporary arts center, this is a kind of old school, formal theater,
yes.
And it has fly space, which not many people build anymore.
No.
And in some ways, I guess it reveals my closeness to the building of this theater and seeing a lot of work here. It felt sort of like a love letter to old school theater technology in a certain way.
Right.
The equipment, the way the rigging was, you see the pulleys working and all the.
Yeah.
Do you have a love of that kind of?
Definitely. Well, I always think of dance as this impossibly analog art form,
Right.
and that's its beauty and its frustration, and production really is too. And even no matter how technologically advanced your theater or your equipment, it's working on the same basic principles of light, of electricity and mirrors, and ropes and pulleys, and somebody, you can have your $20,000 projector, but it arrives on a truck and somebody has to unload that truck and wheel that thing in and unpack it and cable it and troubleshoot it if it breaks down. So that never goes away.
And use wrenches and regular tools.
Right.
And that's the manual labor aspect of this work.
Yeah, and if anything, I feel like I wish we could do more of that in this piece. And some of that we just couldn't, because some of it just didn't, as the piece sort of like came together, like things had to drop away and some of that stuff left, and then some things are just sort of like logistical, like if we undo that and we have to go through this to do that, and that's and then some of it is like, there are safety or house rules, things like that. But yeah, definitely I remember having a moment, in my 20s working as a technician on a show, and just like someone mentioned how much it cost, which at the time, it was
how much running the
how much this particular show cost. It was like $30,000, and it was like 1994.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even conceive of $30,000 for a show in 1994 that was going to run for a couple days, and how long it took us to install it in some dumpy, probably illegal warehouse on the Lower East Side. And I just remember thinking like, oh my God, this is like Sisyphean, there's so much, we're expending so much labor and money on what? On what? And, not that I thought art wasn't worth it, but I just was like, this is crazy. And it really,
there's only a few hundred people who get to experience it or something. And
now of course I'm like, that's the great part, if you can pay for it.
So you don't feel ever, you feel that's partly what makes it special, is the fact that you have to want to see it and get yourself there.
Well, for sure, and the art form as a whole, and it is incredible to me that it's pretty hard to keep advancing the technology of performance, and you still keep needing people.
Right.
And the answer is usually you keep understaffing. You know what I mean? Like the sort of idea of efficiency becomes about money, so you understaff, which is then what partly places the pressure on the workers, because there's only so much that you can outsource to things that aren't people.
Right.
And so the people still have to do all this stuff, and it actually takes a long time, and it's which is also where I think artists sometimes have a hard time with crews, because they don't understand why things take so long.
Right.
and they just take.
And producers too have.
Yeah, and sometimes just stuff takes a long time because a person has to do it.
Yeah. Can you talk about the role of light, smoke, and the ephemeralness of those aspects? You have a very human, almost drama unfolding, or a relationship between people on this stage, and often they disappear, and the relationship is delivered by technology and ephemeral forms to the audience. And the way the place of that in this work for you.
Well, some of it in terms of the lighting, I think it was just always, so much of my experience of being a technician is the lighting focus. I mean, actually, as a technician, I really prefer doing scenic work, which is more fun for me. I like the tactile stuff.
Right.
But I love sitting in a theater while lighting focus is happening.
Yeah.
It's so emotional and atmospheric and beautiful.
Right.
And so I always knew from the very beginning of the piece, like, well, lighting is absolutely essential. Like, what lighting can say,
right.
Particularly in its most raw, stripped down form, when it's just a single light that's actually out of focus, and we get to see the process of it coming into focus.
Right.
I mean, just that alone, it's a single light, we put it into focus, and by doing that, we learn how the lighting unit works. We learn all of the features that it has, because we're just watching it change before our eyes.
Right.
And we can see that a person has to do that to that light to make those changes happen. And their gesture is tiny, but it has this huge effect in what we see. And then there's of course, like a lot of, there's choreography in just the how a lighting designer directs that focus.
There is, yeah.
And that's just one thing.
Right.
That's just one thing, and it contains all those things. So, and I think, working on my last show with Kerris in particular, we really had so much time to just, make the lighting perfect everywhere we went. To really just be like, this one transition is a half second too long, and we could spend half an hour just getting it perfect. And all those things have to change from venue to venue, because the lighting instruments are different from venue to venue, and they fire differently. So the dimmers and the lamps working together, their timings will vary. So, but anyway, I really felt like we had such a common language around that, and so that was one of the hard things with not having continuity with lighting designers from the beginning to the end of the project, of rebuilding those relationships and reestablishing the bond and the language. So that was always going to be there, and then the smoke and the fog. I mean, the final section with the moving lights and the fog, I was literally at a Low concert in Minneapolis at First Avenue.
Oh, really?
And they had, I can't remember what song it was. I don't think it's the one we used, but it might have been. But there was stage fog and there were some moving lights. Very different than what we're doing.
Right.
But the energy in the room, everybody, it's also a concert, so it's such a different, it's one of those like art forms where like everybody who goes to your concert really wants to be there, as opposed to, people who come to your dance show who are like, let me see what you got. So you're in a loving crowd, but so everybody was just like, everybody knows the song, everybody's feeling the lights, and I was like, oh my God, this is what people want.
Yeah.
Everybody loves music. Everyone's responding to this like display, this beautiful spectacle. Right. And everyone is united in this moment. Right. And also we are being guided through this moment. Our unity is pointed out to us by the fact that we all know this song. Right. Or we all love this band. So I was just like, this is how I want to end the show. And I texted Carrie from the concert. And I was like,
really?
I just figured out the ending to the show.
Huh.
And so she actually never got to make that section at all.
Oh.
But to me, it was, about like, kind of, there are no people left by the end of the show. Yet there's all this movement and choreography, and it's all through automation and through non-human forms. So the lights move, the fog moves on its own, and that you didn't need any people to do it. Although, of course, someone had to program those moving lights. But and it's a little bit of a let them eat cake moment on some level too. Of like, well, we've done all of this stuff, but what you really want, what we all really want, is spectacle and emotion and
ecstasy.
Sensation.
Yeah,
and that's what the moving lights can do, is because they can shine on you and move and make you feel like you're moving. They provide optical illusions and make you feel like you're going down a tunnel. So they produce, sensation within you, kinetic sensation, by you doing nothing.
Knowing that you have that power to create that emotion, does it also can it feel manipulative? Like,
I think it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
I mean, well, all of it is.
Right.
I mean, in some way.
Yeah,
I mean, because you are trying to sculpt. I mean, I know that people aren't going to feel what I want them to feel all the time. So it's not that I'm trying to, make everyone hit this bullseye. But, I mean, we're all, like, anything you make is about trying to, connect, make someone connect to something.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, I think that last section, I mean, it doesn't always feel like a power because it doesn't always feel like we've nailed that section,
Right.
But,
did you see it as something of an elegy as well?
Yeah, I feel like it's also there's a bit of the, like, God speaking, parting, speaking to Moses, or the room speaking back. I definitely feel that, the whole, electrical system, which is like the nervous system of the building, talking back, and it, it's a memorial,
right?
But it's also I don't know. I feel like it's like this huge, like, to me it feels very much like it's this thing we're giving, away.
Yeah, yep. And you end with 6 or 7 ghost lights that you see behind us, and the ghost light tradition in the theater is that when you leave the stage, the last person leaves a single light up, so that I'm told both it will keep the ghosts away, but also it will keep people from getting hurt who happen to wander onto the stage when it's dark. Yeah. What? Tell me about. Was that an early idea? And obviously, there's ghosts in this work.
There are a lot of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's interesting when we. Speaking of that, and the moving lights, originally in the moving light section, on our first version of our tech rider, Carrie spec'd, when she was speccing the equipment, she wanted like 10 moving lights.
Oh.
And
you had
which is
5,
really expensive.
Right? Was it 5?
Well, we have 7 here, but
we don't own any. We don't own any.
Right.
Okay.
And most places don't.
Rock and roll tours do.
And some bigger.
Yeah.
But it was supposed to be. We scaled it down to 5 because we got like an estimate. I was like, well, I want to just find out how much this is going to cost. So when I had to have these conversations with presenters, we actually spec'd it for New York because I figured that would be the most expensive. And it was crazy. And I was like, is there any way we can do this with fewer? And I said, did you pick 10 moving lights because there are 10 of us in the show? And she said, yes, of course. So there already are your ghosts. But yeah, the ghost lights were always, I think, going to be a part of it. And we had an experience in one theater on a residency where something bad happened, and we lost like the final day of our residency because there was a problem with the building. And I was the person who discovered the problem. I got there early and discovered this problem, and after I discovered the problem, I realized that the ghost light wasn't plugged in that when we had left that night, the house guy,
yeah.
I don't know if he hadn't plugged it in or it had gone off, but I looked over and I saw that it wasn't on, and I was like, oh. Well, there we go. So that's why they turn off, I think.
Right. Was that a sense of a kind of superstition that without the light, or did the light?
I mean,
the light didn't cause because somebody couldn't see?
I mean, at the time I didn't think so, but then as things progressed over the course of the next year, I was like, oh God.
Yeah.
Maybe that was the beginning of the end.
There's also behind these black, whatever
shrouds.
This duvetine, yeah, shrouds. There's these pieces of storage units for theatrical equipment that have this remarkable sculptural beauty. Do you want to talk about? And at one point also, you had referenced this thinking of this work as a kind of exhibition of manual labor.
Right.
Could you talk about your relationship with the visual arts and how you saw these pieces as kind of found sculptures and it's the visual aspect of this work?
Right. Well, most of these pieces, well, two of them are made by the lighting supervisor here at the Walker for the Walker, just for day-to-day storage, and which is in and of itself a great.
He just constructed.
In a nutshell, story
metal
about.
Worked it to build the.
Yeah, he welded them.
Wow.
You know, so they're designed for the equipment that you own, and you know, work for this space, and work for his system, his relationship to this stuff, how he thinks it should be stored. I mean, and
in all your work here over the years, had you always admired the look, the elegance of those pieces?
this one, which is especially because it's very brutal looking and amazing, and like you, what would you even ever use it for besides exactly what it's used for? And and actually, I think what there was one point when I was working. Just I don't even know, who knows, some show here, and that object was over there against the wall, and there was a light that was out of focus, just happened to be pointing right on it, making this like perfect spotlight on it. And I mean, it just looked so good. It was, it was like a fetish object. Yeah, sure. And the lighting was also a fetish object. And so, it was really like, oh God, that just... that was, that's one of those moments that happen. That's not a moment. There's nothing sculpted about it. It's not a curated moment. It's not planned, and it's just that this is the environment that we work in all the time, and these random beautiful things happen. And in fact, I was working a show. It was a Bill T. Jones show here many, many, many years ago, and
in this theater.
And there was a couch in the piece, and there wasn't a lot of wing space, backstage space, and so the couch was a part of the set, and it was upstage, and the only behind a curtain, and the only place for me to be backstage was to sit on that couch to wait for my next thing, because there was nowhere else for me to stand. And I just remember spending so many hours just sitting back there waiting, for whatever, and just seeing the spill of the light coming off into the wings, and they had fog also, I think, and hearing this like big dramatic, music. And, yet it was like endless hours for me. And I was like, this is my cubicle. These are my, kind of boring, I got nothing to do at work hours, but they are incredibly beautifully lit. They're scored, they're artistically like sculpted. But this is just like non-time for me.
And when you say beautifully lit, you mean even the unintentional spillover light.
Even the wings,
that you got to see that was different than what the audience was seeing. I think. And that was part of the inspiration behind this whole section of the stagehands backstage when the stuff, sort of
tossers,
Lucinda or whatever, perform dance, and you don't see.
Lucinda was a big part of it too.
And its the use of Philip Glass music, who's had an important history with many dance artists in this theater, as well as historically with the Walker and things. Was that we want to talk about like just that moment that you've got you've got technicians who are both bored and utterly stressed at the same time.
Right. Yeah, we tried a lot of different ways to get at the idea of that time, of the downtime.
And you also had the dilemma, I mean, you're making a piece of theater that you want to engage with people for 60 or 80 minutes or something. And a lot of work in tech theater is boring to watch a little bit.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of create some sense of what the lives of technicians are really without it boring people, you know? And so you kind of recreated that whole entire scene.
Yeah. Yeah, some of it was about just trying to show the boringness. We did it like early. I think early on I was like, yeah, this funny thing that happened. You know, sometimes when like, I don't know if I've ever actually seen a show where it happened, but like someone throwing a chair into the wings, you know, like in a musical or something, and like you got to be the guy that like catches the chair, and
you don't hear it fall or anything.
Right, and like where does that stuff go? You know, it goes to the guy, you know. So we were trying to at one point do this idea of things getting thrown away to places that you can't see, and like the performer who throws something off stage, and you know, it gets caught by some invisible person, and then we just decided to flip it. And I didn't actually think we were, you know, flip it so that we only saw the backstage, and but I didn't actually think we were going to really do that idea.
Right. And then
I was like, well, we're not really going to do this in the show where we're like throwing stuff around, and you know, also it just was so like a one-liner. You know, you get it after the first thing.
Yeah.
But then we just, I don't know, I think we did a version of it where it actually started to get really funny and interesting.
Right.
Like it was funny, but it also got interesting.
Yeah.
And then that there were so many things that could happen that, you know, I've also in the piece there was always this, you know, thing of the dance within the dance. Like, what is the dance that show that they are supposedly in tech for?
Yes.
And that we would never see it.
Right.
And I actually, dance that's happening upstage of that, so there's a border in, so you can't see the whole upstage.
The audience essentially is shut out from seeing the core of the dance itself. They see the people coming off the stage and the shadows.
They see the dancers run to the wings, they see the shadows cast on the walls, and they see this stuff come flying over that border. And the technicians are downstage of the border and they're catching stuff. I don't really think of the dance that's happening upstage of that border as a part of the show. It's as a part of the dance within the dance. But I think a lot of people read it that way, and that's great. That's one of those just ideas that, like, I don't feel possessive about how that's looked at all. Like, of course, it makes sense that people think that that's
that you have a kind of
because there is a dance section that happens right before it that's very performed. The section we call Todd Haynes.
Yes. And
then the border comes in. So the obvious progression of the narrative is that the dance is continuing, and we've just flipped the front. Personally, I'm like, yeah, whatever, you know, sure, sure. I mean, yes, of course you would read it that way, but I don't feel married to that idea. I don't need it personally as a choreographer. I don't need to have continuity of that material that the dancers are doing. I guess that's really an aside, but yeah, that then could be a whole story told by the objects as well. That when the objects get deployed from upstage of that border, and we see them come up, come up into the air over the border, it also tells us what the dancers are doing.
Yes,
you know? If 3 of those objects come at once, we know all 3 of them are doing something in unison.
Yeah.
So I don't know, just like what you can tell that's happening that you can't see was curious to me. And then the objects themselves could tell a story or interrupt a story, and some of them reference other dances. So. Which,
like this Mylar pillows, small versions of
which we had the Mylar pillows already.
Yeah.
And I just went to, you know, Axeman and the University of Minnesota warehouse sale, where you can just get like junk for nothing.
Right.
Just to find random objects that I thought would look good.
Yeah.
And that would catch light well, and I found those. And so we had them for a while before I realized, oh, these are miniature Cunningham rainforest
silver cloud.
pillars.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And it also, I've been reading about, Rauschenberg's performative constructions around like scenario and things. And
sure.
He, there was a moment in the early '60s where that was his mode. He would go into town and just find a bunch of junk, and then it would be assembled into a set, into some kind of ramshackle set. And when your technicians were gathering the material being thrown over, it was all placed in a square, and it became its own sort of assemblage in a certain way. I mean, that's what I was sort of reading. It became like this junk of the discarded dance items would become a sculptural piece.
And that was Andy's idea. He's one of the technicians.
Oh.
But it's very much what you would do.
Really?
You tape off in a little white square, like backstage, you would tape off the area where stuff is going to go or where someone is going to come to get it, so that you know where it is. It's it's visible.
Right.
And I think that was his idea. Like, well, why don't I make a tape square, and we put all the stuff in that, and we're like, and let's try to make it as organized as possible, which then becomes impossible.
Yeah, right.
Because there's too much stuff and the square is too small.
Yeah. One of the things you said about the work in another, I think the interview with Kate, was about how many different agendas that people come to the work with or have in viewing the work. And you said you were quite comfortable with lots of different perspectives, and that you made the work in a certain way that could speak to a lot of different points of view.
I hope so.
Is there, if you had to say what your ultimate, I know. Well, or what?
Don't you dare ask me that.
Do you feel like people leave the theater after seeing Soft Goods with? Maybe I'll tell you what
that's easier.
I think that the sense of all the mystery and even a lack of appreciation for what happens to create an experience in the theater and the people that make that happen, as well as just a kind of sense of the form of theater itself and what constitutes its construction, are things that I feel like people leave perhaps having a different sense of other work they will see in the future, as well as a sense of greater understanding of the power dynamics, the tensions, the humanity that lives on stage, and the beauty of the technology that still is applied to make theater.
Which you can really see in this space because you can see some of the technology, because there's a fly house and you can see the rail getting run, and the proscenium opening is wide enough that you can actually see those things.
All that, right.
I mean, I would include in that I feel that dance and dancers are a part of that too. I mean,
definitely
the dance and dancers in this show, most of their time is on stage is spent doing things that most people think isn't the real dancing yet.
Right.
And one of the things that I love about dance and dancers is the intelligence and all of the different ways that
the physical, the kinetic intelligence as well,
intellectual, mental,
and
communicative intelligence that happens on all levels. So, dancing is really mental work, and that people tend to think that dancers do what they do from like sensation. I mean, they're about feeling things and
or they have already a preset organic or just physical capability to do this stuff naturally.
Right, and that they don't have to figure things out mentally. And the body is sort of, the body is the first and the last, points of execution for the dancer, but most of the rest of it is this place in between that's about mental intelligence, working things out, communicating with other dancers, and not always verbally, but
right.
animalistically, like
Yeah.
understanding how to problem solve and, you know, adjust and compromise without having to have a big discussion about it.
Right.
But that's
Yeah.
not a physical thing either. It's a social thing.
Right. Yeah.
And social intelligence in that way requires all intelligence from all parts of your being.
Right.
I mean, I feel like dancers are so woefully underappreciated
Right.
for that. So I
And
feel like
almost the need to keep an entire construction, a whole composition in their heads
Yeah.
without any score they can look at, or, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously there's a memory aspect, but there's a physicalization and understanding of the construction of the movement.
And they, in the piece, we have a section, a long section, where they're, you know, they're working out a problem in the dance, and they're talking about it. Then they're also not dealing with it at all, and they're goofing around and like talking about other stuff and like riffing on moves from, you
From
know,
earlier
early in their dance
times.
careers
Yeah,
or whatever.
yeah.
And so that within that we can show the same way that through the lighting focus we can show you how a light works. That's the dance version of showing you how a dance works.
Huh.
The ways that dancers know how to rewind in their material to find the spot that they all share in common, so they can find a spot to restart from and go forward.
Yeah.
And how, you know, and the part of that section where they're just goofing around and riffing on stuff, it's like that's what they really want to be doing, or that's who they really are, but they're being asked to do this other stuff.
Yeah.
That the dance that people pay to see is not necessarily always the dance that they want to be working on at any given moment.
Right.
And that's a part of what you do at the workplace. You know, part of what you do at the workplace is not the work that you're supposed to be doing.
Right,
you do other
right.
stuff.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to honor like the parallel, you know, in the dance world of what we're showing in the production world.
Right.
One of the things that some people have said about, or asked me about this piece, like sometimes people say, oh, do the technicians dance? And sometimes people say, oh, I mean, I think there's this idea that, oh, you know, poor stage hands, they never get the applause. And that's not it at all, you know. I mean, and most stage hands and technicians don't really care about that.
Right.
I mean, everybody wants to be appreciated for doing their job well, but it's really not about, you know, it's not a population of people who, you know, would be performers if only they could, or that someone would let them. Or it's not, it's kind of totally missing the the point. I don't mean just missing the point of the piece, but missing the point of like the whole field.
What they,
So yeah, I mean, I think it is, you know, showing all the beauty of that work and showing the artistry of the people who do it, and getting to see them, and but it's not, you know, solely about saying, oh, look at these, you know, let's bring the back to the you know, the backstage forward and show, you know, show some appreciation to these people.
Right.
And what I'm trying to just do is show that they're people.
Right. Yeah.
And that also that they're working like under conditions that are emotionally hazardous at times, in addition to being physically dangerous.
Right. Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you for really beautiful work, and
thank you for making it possible.
Glad we'll have a life ahead. So, thanks.